The Journey of an Apprentice Pilgrim, Series Divine Footsteps. Book 2, written by Felipe Chavarro Polania, narrated by Louise Robinson, Brian Wilson, Christine Stevens, Otoniel Lewis, Marcus Burton, Luke Harris, Martin Payne, Michael Owen, Maxie Holmes. Kadmiel's first journey. Kadmiel, on horseback, rode through the walls of his city. Eager to begin his journey, he hastened to his home. When he arrived, he led his horse to the stable and hurried into his room to take with him the chest and the scrolls he kept inside. Then he sought out his mother and grandmother and told them the words that Asal and his uncle had spoken to him, and having embraced and kissed them, he hastened out of the house. Then he put his grandfather's little chest into the chest Asael had given him, and quickly mounted his steed and rode off to the bazaars to buy provisions. He passed the shops and bazaars displaying the fabrics and groceries he needed for his journey. Suddenly, just ahead, past a small vegetable stall, Kadmiel spotted a shop specializing in cotton clothing for his journey into the desert. So he jumped down from his steed and hurried into the shop to buy his clothing. Having entered, he saw a beautiful cotton goat's cloak, and without thinking, he took it and bought it. At that moment, the merchant came out of the shop to meet him and asked,
"What are you looking for, boy?"
Then Kadmiel looked at him steadily and said,
"I'm looking for clothes suitable for crossing the desert of Bezalel."
The merchant frowned and said,
"If you are going to the desert of Bezalel, that cloak you have chosen will help you at night when the temperature drops. But bear in mind that it is made of choice Barbadian cotton, and you will have to pay a high price for it."
Kadmiel stared at him and said,
"I will pay its fair price."
Then the merchant looked at him and said,
"Very well, my boy. However, when the rays of the rising sun light up the horizon, you must use a cotton with a lower density of weave. Otherwise, you will feel a very exhausting heat. For the time being, I suggest you wear the clothes I will show you, as they will protect you from the inclement weather."
So Kadmiel followed the merchant's recommendations and wore his boots, cloak and turban for only 3 copper coins. But as the merchant warned him, his cloak required 7 copper coins. So it was that Kadmiel paid 7 copper coins for his chosen cloak, but it seemed to him like 7 white ones, for it was precious to him. Outside the bazaar, he went to the chest that Asal had given him and hastened to put in the garments he had acquired in the market. Carefully, he rolled up his garments, and in an attempt to settle them inside the chest, he saw inside the receptacle a letter sealed with the ring Asael used to announce the most important instructions in the field. He took it between his fingers, and as he examined it carefully, he could see that Asael had used elaborate calligraphy to write a message that read,
"Read it before you go into the wilderness. He who is wise and shrewd must receive counsel before he begins a long journey."
Kadmiel hesitated for a moment over the contents of this letter, and then hurried to put it back in the chest, hastily putting his clothes over the letter. Then he closed the lid and put on the waistbands. On the spot, he hastened to get on his steed and went to the camel market. He then bargained with the camel traders to exchange his steed for a camel and 30 copper coins. He then loaded his camel with provisions and put the chest on the camel, tying it tightly. Kadmiel in the Bezalel Desert. Kadmiel was 19 years old when he set out on his journey through the desert of Bezalel towards the land of Sagnit. And Kadmiel left his hometown and departed from his mentors Asahel and Raphael to pursue his life's project. However, in haste to reach his destination, he mounted his camel in the middle of the night and rode into the desert, heading for the hills. Unfamiliar with this lonely place, and having only a small idea of the direction he had to take to reach Sagnit, he continued his journey through the night and into the next day, full of anticipation. Towards the end of the afternoon, dejected and restless, Kadmiel alighted from his camel, and taking the chest containing his most valuable possessions, he embraced it and lay down on a desert dune, falling asleep. Waking at first light, Kadmiel found that his camel was gone, and with it all his provisions for the journey. In utter helplessness, he knelt down on the dune and cried aloud,
"My God, what will become of me now? for I have neither food nor water.
Discouraged by his circumstances, he looked around him, and only the sun, veiled by the sand suspended in the air, accompanied him on the horizon. Kadmiel remained on his knees, hoping for some form of relief from heaven. Suddenly, the words of his grandfather came to his mind.
Even in silence there is fruit, my son. For in silence and stillness, a man must look upon his failures. In this way he can know his teachers, and by taking their teachings, he will regain his confidence and firm his steps.
Stunned in thought, he suddenly recalled the letter Asael had written to him, with the injunction to be read before he set out on his journey. And coming to himself, he exclaimed aloud,
"How clumsy I have been to disregard the advice and in my haste to forget the instruction of my counselor Asael!"
And he hastened and returned to the chest and reached into it for the letter sealed by Asael. Having found it under his garments, he broke the seal of the envelope that covered it and began to read. Fourth flash of wisdom.
My dear son, I am deeply proud of you, for I have seen you take boldly to your vocation as an apprentice. Today I feel that like every man among the living, you have been presented with a unique opportunity, which must be seized without delay, before it fades away and leaves before you only the remorse that pervades those who turn to fear and doubt for counsel. It is my hope that this letter has been the first thing your eyes have examined before you venture into the wilderness. Yet if, like any man in the land of the living, you have made the mistake of not reflecting before you acted, and have been carried away by your haste and ambition, fear not, for I have learned that when a man has come from victory to victory as you have, he often forgets to keep himself humble. Triumph stuns, my dear boy, and before great failures goes the proud heart. Therefore never let triumph persuade you that you do not need the advice, and that you will never fail again. Now, my dear Kadmiel, it is my duty as your mentor to give you the last of my treasures. My prayer to my Maker today is that he will open your understanding, and that you will listen to my teaching. Being persuaded of this, I shall hand over to you the commandments which have sustained me throughout my life, and have made me a rich and prosperous man to this day. If you carefully observe them, you will become far more prosperous than you have ever dreamed of. Let us begin. First, always entrust yourself to your Maker, remembering him before any decision. And how are you to apply this principle? The answer is simple. Know that God, though invisible to your eyes, will speak clearly using your mentors. Do not be like many who despise their counsel, and when they err, attribute their folly to God, ignoring his favor. Remember always that the Most High will persistently instruct thee by means of the three sources of wisdom which we have taught thee. Second, don't let your triumphs daze you, filling your heart with arrogance. The only antidote I know is to always go back to the basics of what you have learned. Think again, for you can never learn enough of anything. Everything is subject to improvement. So always remain a learner, being moldable. Never persuade yourself that you know it all. Thirdly, never give up your right to make mistakes. To be an apprentice is to learn every day, and through that learning, you will increase your capacity to make better decisions. Don't fool yourself, for by abandoning your learning for a few hours, see what a foolish thing you have done by wandering recklessly into the wilderness. Remember, the more you learn, the better decisions you will make, so your mistakes will also decrease. Never stop learning. Fourth, undertake while others retreat, trust while others distrust, fly while others hide their wings, dig while others stay on the surface, investigate, reflect, scrutinize while others lie inert. Keep moving. Don't give up the curiosity that, like water, keeps you alive. Live intensely, making different decisions every day. Fifth, like today, never be afraid to venture into the unknown. Don't forget, my dear boy, that the biggest mistake we can make is to refrain from trying something new. When you reach my age, the only remorse you will have will be for the roads you did not travel, for the times you refrained from digging deeper, contenting yourself with having discovered the surface. The real treasures are found in the depths. You have to dig to find them. It is not for nothing that the earth itself has hidden its treasures solicitously. Don't forget, to rise above your limits, you have to dig much deeper within yourself. Don't want to shine like a star without first burning within. Never give up your mentor's time, training, and failure. Fail early so that you have more time to apply what you have learned. Sixth, never cling to a profession. Choose instead the vocation of leaving your mark on the land in which you were planted by your Creator. And what greater mark than to be an apprentice, sharing your learning and experience with the world? Being convinced of this, ask and inquire constantly, accepting your ignorance for a moment. If you do so, you will save yourself from being an ignoramus your whole existence. Constantly ask your mentors. Get a little better every day. Never let your presumption become greater than your ambition to learn more. Seventh, if you continually live your life with the conviction and certainty that your dreams are a reality, even if you do not see them, reality will have no escape but to strive to become its image and likeness. Success follows those who are persuaded of their dreams. Increase your faith and be persuaded of them. Now that you have listened to me, my boy, I must give you some recommendations for a successful trip to Sagnet. Don't forget to tie up your camel when you're not with him. I know this advice has come too late, but fear not, for I made the same mistake when I was a boy. To get over it, go to where the sun rises, for the camel has to look for the water reservoirs in that region. If you increase your march, you may come across him at nightfall and find him lying on the sand with his head and neck raised to rest. Be careful not to attract his attention by approaching him in haste. When you have recovered your camel, eat and sleep to regain your strength. Take care not to travel during the night, lest you stray into the desert. Wander about and wander like a fugitive. Always start your journey at dawn, heading in the opposite direction from where the sun rises. In this way, the sun will be at your back at daybreak and will be hidden on the horizon at sunset. 3 days' journey will take you through the desert, and you will arrive at the walls of Sagnet. My dear boy, do not let your soul faint within you, for as I write this letter in my own handwriting, I remember my mentor. His name was Ashir, and he was a man of great prosperity. One day, as he was instructing me in the way of wisdom, he told me how his people, after having cried out in their distress to the Almighty, were guided by a straight path to reach an inhabited city. Regardless of their hunger and thirst, he sustained them with food, and their clothing never grew old upon them. Call upon the author of your life, and neither the desert nor the merciless heat of the sun shall dry up the fountain of thy existence, but only consume the fountain of thy pride. I commend you to the one wise Creator of all things, bidding you farewell for a short time with this letter. My best wishes for your success in your vocation as an apprentice. Keep always that which has been entrusted to you. With love, Asael.
Kadmiel finds his camel. Kadmiel hurriedly took his clothes from the chest and put them on. Then he put on his chosen cloak and set off in the direction of the sun. Towards the end of the afternoon, Kadmiel was crossing a very arid place, uninhabited like the desert. From that moment on, the young man began to feel his feet slipping as he struggled to keep moving. His face was glistening with sweat, and he was breathing heavily. With every step he took, his hope of finding his camel dwindled, and a feeling that he would surely die in the desert overwhelmed him. After he had traveled some 50 furlongs, he felt unable to go any further, and in utter helplessness, Kadmiel cried out to God, saying,
"Into thy hands I commit my existence."
And he lay down on the ground and slept, and so the boy lay there for about an hour. When he awoke from his faintness, he sat up and looked about him, and lo and behold, his camel was opposite him about a bow shot away, lying on the sand, with his head and neck raised in repose. With some relief at his little rest, his lips parched and bleeding, his tongue rough and swollen, felt his despair evaporate, and in its place his mental clarity was restored to him. Then, with lightning speed, he rose to his feet and crept towards his camel. Suddenly, when the boy had reached a safe distance, he pounced upon the ties and some blankets which he had placed on the saddle of his camel. After he had scrupulously secured it, tears came to the young man's eyes, and he knelt down on his knees, raising his hands and giving thanks to heaven. And so it was that Kadmiel was able to retrieve his lost camel. After a brief pause, staggering on his weakened legs, he ate and drank until he had eaten his fill. And so, as it began to grow dusk, A little ahead of the twilight, the rapturous beauty of a fiery sunset announced to Kadmiel that it was the right time to begin pitching his tent. Only then could he shelter from the inclemency of the desert for the night. So with diligence, the young man hastened to secure the branches of wood which he had bought from the merchants in his hometown. He then buried a row of small poles to support the skins that would cover his small tent. When he had finished, he fastened the rope securely until his tent was firmly stretched, and covering it with the skins he possessed, he finished his work. With his camel secured and his tent completely finished, Kadmiel entered his new shelter and set up a small bed with some furs he had brought with him. He then reclined on his bed to rest. Then, looking out the door of his tent, he could see the sky and thus contemplate a nightfall of infinite stars. Kadmiel smiled, lying there on his bed, looking up at the immensity of the sky torn with immense stars, and with a deep sigh, he spoke.
Today, as I look out the door of my tent and see a mysterious sky, adorned with an infinity of stars, I think of the immensity of the one who created all things. Though I have not yet met him, I can say with certainty that I was sheltered by his unseen hand. In this desert of stillness, where the inaccessible darkness surrounds me, who but God would put the light of the stars through my roof, so that I am only enlightened if I lift my eyes to the heavens, which are his habitation. Thanks to him, I now rest in my bed, after my soul has breathed in the darkness of a road that led me to death. I will seek my Creator as long as he can be found, for he has hedged my way with a hedge so that I did not stray into dark paths. I rejoice, for even in my folly the Almighty hedged me in on every side so that I did not perish. And even though I was clumsy, I did not die as a fugitive in the wilderness. And when my body fainted with thirst and my soul was troubled within me, did not my Creator have mercy on me? For my feet were slipping in the desert sand, and my life was gradually fading like a lone star. My strength had forsaken me, and yet only by fulfilling the design of seeking him, I found victory in his counsel. What would have become of me if in my folly I had lost Asahel's letter? Surely I would have perished in the wilderness, and with my death, my dreams would have perished. Now I understand that for him who trusts in his Maker, difficulty will destroy him. For regardless of my clumsiness and carelessness, his light shone for me once more, through one of the fountains of wisdom. I give thanks because my death was undeniable, and the path I was treading was uncertain. Yet, in my despair, I cried out to the Unseen One, and received his words. Then, my clarity was returned to me, and I resisted the death who put a noose around my neck. The search for my Maker has been like greenery, and like the shade of acacia in the desert. Only because of him. Evening came, and I found refuge and was sheltered from drinking my tears when I was thirsty. I will seek my Maker as long as I can be found. For out of his mouth came my hope, and it was more precious to me than the oasis to the desert dweller. His guidance was more precious than water in a dry land, and all that my soul could desire could not compare with it.
He closed his eyes and, exhausted from his journey, slept peacefully. When Kadmiel woke up, it was early morning, and the first rays of the sun were peeking out of the east. He sat up and gazed in fascination at the vastness of the desert around him. And after a brief pause, he ran to the entrance of his tent. Outside lay his camel, lying down and tethered close by. And as Kadmiel gazed at the grandeur of the desert, he felt a new freshness in the morning air. Then hastily, he turned and began to dismantle his little tent. When he had finished his work, the young man walked slowly to his camel, secured all the parts of his little tent on his mount, and hurried off. And so Kadmiel began his journey across the desert again, heading in the opposite direction to the rising sun, turning neither to the right nor to the left. Towards noon, the heat of the sun was merciless, so the young man covered his face still more and kept on walking, though with great difficulty. Towards the end of the afternoon, Kadmiel reached the entrance to what looked like an abandoned camp. The young man then carefully entered tent by tent to investigate whether anyone was inside. Then, upon entering the 7th tent, the boy could see a tiny wooden box. Then, seeing that the camp was completely abandoned, he picked it up and carefully opened it. Examining the inside, he could discover a tube made of leather, from which hung a piece of skin bearing various inscriptions. As he scrutinized them, he could make out one written in his native language that read, "A New Nature." This aroused the young man's interest immensely, and he hastened to open the tube. He carefully removed the lid and could see what he thought looked like a papyrus. Although he had had his hands on various materials that foreigners used to transmit their culture and teachings, this material was unlike any other he had seen or touched with his hands in the past. On this papyrus, it had been written with calamus, and for this reason its ink was not black, but red. However, after the young man glimpsed the contents of the papyrus, to his great sorrow and regret, it was written in a language that could not be interpreted by someone from his home country. Then, Kadmiel took the papyrus, rolled it up meekly, and put it into the tube, and closed the lid with it. He then inspected the tent a little further, found a small goatskin pouch, and without hesitation took it for himself. Immediately, he left the tent and put the tube inside the bag he had found. Then he unmoored his camel and resumed the path that led him to Sagnit, seeing a fiery sunset and the last of the purple trees cresting his horizon. From then on, the young man felt his camel slowly and with great effort march over the desert dunes. So, also weakened, the young man decided to stop his march there, to put up his small tent again, to eat, drink, and regain his strength. After he had eaten and drunk, Kadmiel was absorbed in thought. Many questions were passing through his mind concerning the papyrus he had found.
What will the other inscriptions say? Where will I find someone who can interpret the inscriptions and the contents of this papyrus? What will become of the inhabitants of this camp?
And more importantly,
Why would they leave behind such a strange papyrus? What will I answer those who ask me about this papyrus? Will this be an answer to what I have been searching for years?
he shook his head in disgust at the thought of the new riddle that had come into his hands. Maybe he should return the papyrus to the abandoned shop where he found it. Perhaps he should forget that papyrus and continue his vocation as an apprentice. However, as an apprentice, he should seek the interpretation of the papyrus so that he could profit from its wisdom. Besides, if the papyrus was not of great value, why would its writer have used such a special material to convey its contents? He longed for a few moments to be with Asael and Raphael in his homeland. Surely they would be able to help him to find an interpreter among the inhabitants of their country. Then his thoughts turned back to Sagnit and his vocation as an apprentice, and the doubts that had plagued him vanished at once. Shady was the night, and the sky was full of stars. Tonight he would sleep again in his little tent, and tomorrow would be his last day's journey to reach his destination. Tomorrow, he was sure, would be a better day, for he would leave behind him the solitude of an arid desert to pursue his vocation as an apprentice once more. Then, remembering the teachings of Asael, he raised his hands and called upon the Most High, saying,
Oh God, I am like a small and lonely clump of sand among all the universe you have created. Yet in your favor you have preserved me until this day. For this reason I am persuaded that I am of great value, for you have taken care of me. Therefore, help me to fulfill thy design. And if from this papyrus I am to drink from the fountain of thy wisdom, guide me and show me the way to know its interpretation. Remember this, young apprentice.
The frosty air hit the small tent, so the young man put on his chosen cloak to keep out the cold, and fell asleep. Kadmiel has two dreams. That night, Kadmiel had a dream. In that vision, he was in a very arid desert, and indeed it was very dry. As he looked around, he saw that he had neither camel nor provisions, so his spirit was stirred within him, and he cried out with a loud voice,
God, do not let me perish in the desert!
Suddenly, there was a noise as he cried out, and behold, in his right hand appeared a small tube made of skin. So, Kadmiel stood motionless and silent for a few moments. Looking at the tube and examining it, he could see that it was the same one he had found in the abandoned camp. Suddenly, a voice said to him,
Open the tube and take out the papyrus that is inside it.
Then, Kadmiel took it out carefully, and as he held it in his hands, the parchment suddenly shrank and took the shape of a small seed in his hands. Then the same voice said to him,
Take the seed and plant it in the sand. For through it I will form an oasis in the desert, and will provide shade for its dwellers.
And he sowed it as he had told him, and behold, there was a trembling, and what had been a small seed grew into a tree, and it grew and became very large until its top reached to heaven. Its trunk was very thick, so thick that an army could not easily fell it. Kadmiel was astonished to see the grandeur and stature of the tree. Its prominence could be seen effortlessly from many stadiums away. Suddenly, Kadmiel heard a loud noise, like the roar of a crowd. And lo and behold, in the distance, he saw a crowd of people, as if all the dwellers of the desert had been summoned to the birth of that tree. As he watched them, he could see them approaching the great tree to take shelter from the scorching desert sun and to partake of its abundant fruit. Suddenly, the young man felt a great trembling, and immediately afterwards, an oasis began to sprout from the dry earth and spread until there was no more barren land, and Kadmiel awoke. Then he looked around, and it was still night. He got up and got down on his knees, for his astonishment was great as he thought about the bewilderment of his dream.
What could be the meaning of this dream?
At once the young man came upon a thought that had never before crossed his mind, and that was that it seemed reasonable and necessary for him to become a sower in the fields of Sagnit. In this way, he would follow what he believed to be God's instruction and continue to treasure wisdom in his capacity as an apprentice, to share it with the world. He fell asleep again and dreamed the second time. This time, the young man saw himself at a scribe's table with a pen in his right hand. Around him, there was a pile of parchment piled up, and on his table, besides the parchment on which he was to write, there was also the same papyrus he had found in the abandoned shop. Suddenly, he heard a voice say,
Read what is written on the scroll.
So the boy read as he was commanded, and behold, the writing said,
Wisdom springs from humility, and only the humble will hear my voice. Where gift and service to the world meet, and patience and persistence kiss, your vocation will dwell. The vocation that I have sown within you, you are to give it to the world with boldness. In this way it will bear fruit and multiply. You must water it with faith, and then victory will march before you and wealth will follow in its footsteps. My tongue is as a very light pen to the scribe, and my message as the most insignificant of seeds. Nevertheless, if my seed is watered with faith and consistency, it will soon take root, and its growth will not cease, until the tree will touch the heavens with its top, and its branches will yield abundant fruit. For whom shall the fruit of the tree be? Do you not know? Have you not heard? Its fruit shall be to satisfy the hungry, and to give sustenance to the inhabitant of the wilderness. And whom shall the tree shade with its shadow? Its goodly shade shall be for everyone who comes near. Do not despise your calling or your dream, for they are my seed, never shrink back. Blessed are you if you believe before you have seen with your eyes.
And Kadmiel awoke, and behold, it was another dream. Nevertheless, because of his vision he was very afraid and thought,
This dream is not like the others. Surely it is the voice of my Maker instructing me what I should do.
Then he got up and took his pen and wrote on a piece of parchment he had everything concerning the two dreams, and opening the shepherd's bag, he put it away. Immediately, because of his fatigue, he lay down again on his bed and fell asleep. It happened that very early in the morning Kadmiel got up in great haste to take down his tent and set out on his last day's journey. Then when he had dismantled his little tent and arranged the saddle of his camel, he opened the shepherd's bag he had found, and taking the skin tube, he raised it to the heavens and made this promise.
If my Maker prospers this journey to the land of Sagnit and allows me to arrive safely at its walls, then I will seek the interpretation of this papyrus, and if necessary I will learn the language in which it was written. Once I have done so, I will share its wisdom with the world.
So saying, he set out for the land of Sagnit. Towards the end of his third day's journey, Kadmiel could see a large walled city in the distance. Then the young man, filled with joy, sang a song, saying,
Blessed be God, for he did not allow his apprentice to perish in the wilderness. Blessed be he, for with his scribal pen he wrote down for me his message, and after hearing it I received great strength. Now, thanks to his extraordinary generosity, the desert did not melt my bones with its rigor, and from heaven the rising sun did not consume me. In the darkness of the night, and in the disheartening vastness of the desert, only my arrogance was diminished, and from his mouth I received great revelation. Today I have a dream and a mission in this world, for from his hand I received my vocation. I will be guided as long as I remain in it. I will persevere regardless of obstacles and living in faith. I will never turn back.
Kadmiel in Sagnit. And it came to pass that while Kadmiel was chanting his song, the camel, though weary, quickened his pace and sped up his march, without need of the whip or the spur. The young man walked for another hour until he entered the walled city of Sagnit through the western gate. Once in the city, he began to search for Eleazar until he came to a small square. Then he got off his camel and, taking him by the halter, led him slowly and with difficulty through the square, crowded with people buying and selling. For the first time in his life, the young man was in another country, and his senses took in the smell of strange food, the sound of new music, and people communicating in different languages. He was completely bewildered by the shouting of hundreds of people who came to the square in search of camels, horses, sheep, carpets, and all kinds of provisions. Suddenly before his eyes, he saw a sign on the top of a tent with many inscriptions on it, which were very similar to those he had seen on the leather tube. As he examined them, he could make out one that said in his native language, "We provide help to foreigners. We speak your language." Seeing this, the boy was relieved and immediately took his camel to the side of a log behind the tent, tied it carefully, and entered the tent. When he had entered, behind the counter he saw an elderly, dark-skinned, light-eyed man, who on seeing him came out to meet him and said,
Boy, what can I do for you? Who are you looking for?
The boy came closer to the old man, and in a voice that betokened relief replied,
I am looking for Eleazar, for I have come from the land of Bosom to pursue my chosen vocation.
You came all this way from Bosom. Did you cross the desert of Bezalel all by yourself?
Yes, sir. I walked a distance of 3 days' journey in the desert to reach this place.
The old man frowned as if distracted.
It has been a long time since I have heard a story like yours. It is not common for a young man of your age to leave his land and his family to venture out in this way. You remind me of my great friend Asael.
The boy hesitated in thought, deciding what he should say, and said,
Asael, is he the same man who has been my mentor these past few years?
Oh, yes, you know my friend Asael too?
Kadmiel was silent as the old man examined him with a penetrating gaze, and after a few moments he replied,
Yes, sir. He's been my mentor while I worked with him in the clay pits.
Now I understand the source of your faith and persistence. As they say in my homeland, the young apprentice is the only letter of recommendation his master needs, and all who read it will know the teachings of the one who instructed him. Come into my tent and tell me of your experiences. I am now fully convinced that Asahel has been your mentor, for you have been able to cross the desert of Bezalel on your own. I am Eleazar, for whom you seek.
The old man leaned back in his chair and listened attentively to Kadmiel's story and each of Asael's teachings during his time at the site. In addition, he also told him many details about his grandfather's design and the chest he had bestowed upon him, as well as his ongoing quest to find what was missing from his first scroll. At times, the old man would nod or shake his head in agreement, showing that he listened willingly to the boy's story. However, of his entire life story, Kadmiel omitted the leather tube with the papyrus inside and the 2 dreams he had had. Finally, Kadmiel, in a solemn voice, described the valuable help that Asael's letter had given him, as well as the doubts and fears that had beset him, seeing that he was about to perish in the desert. When Kadmiel had mentioned all about his journey, the old man asked,
Now then, have you brought with you the letter that Asael wrote to me?
Kadmiel thought for a moment, and then replied,
Yes, I have indeed brought it with me.
Then he hurried to his camel, took Asael's chest, and took out the letter. Then he returned to the tent. Then the old man opened Asael's letter and was distracted for a moment. The young man waited a while and interrupted him.
What does the letter say?
The old man stared at him and replied,
Take the letter, for it is for you too.
The boy took the letter in his hands and read it.
My dear friend Eleazar, today I sent you the most valuable letter any man can send, my young apprentice. This letter is the parchment of the living God, the writing of which is not done by the hand of man, and which, unlike any other, you can never finish reading. The living God is to write upon it continually. using the pen of the scribe of his choice from time to time. The Most High used me by his pen to write on this scroll for a short time. However, my time is over, and now it must be your turn. Therefore, do not forget to give yourself boldly to the task that has been entrusted to you. Always give your best with care. In this way, when your work is finished, you will be able to read it, satisfied that you were always the best pen for the scribe. Remember always to keep intact the ingredients of your experience, which you have diligently drawn from the three sources of wisdom. Always leave the best imprint, understanding that others will read what you have written, to your glory or shame. Never let time, training, and failure stand in the way of the masters, for they are as the sun to the making of ink. In the past, you and I were like vitriol and gum. However, the Most High mixed us and put us in the sun to achieve consistency. Likewise, this boy is being mixed to become the ink that the scribe will use to trace his message to the world. Every man must understand that we are the parchment and the ink that the Creator uses to write his message. However, if it is also in man's heart to become a teacher, he will also have to become a pen. You and I were also like blunt pens for a time. In spite of that, the Most High used obstacles and difficult circumstances like stone to sharpen us, and in due time, we became very light feathers. In all times we are parchment and ink, so that the Most High leaves his indelible mark on our heart through a mentor. If you do your work well, this boy whom your eyes see today will become a sharp pen, which will fulfill its mission by being dipped in ink to be engraved on another apprentice like him. This is the mission of every teacher and mentor. We will always be apprentices as we carry out our work as mentors. Every teacher is moldable, for sometimes he is parchment and ink, and sometimes he becomes a scribe's pen to engrave the work of the Most High on others. But like all teachers, our apprentices and children are our best teachers. Do the work with solicitude. For like the boy, you too are a work of the Most High that will remain under construction until he chooses. On the other hand, if this letter retained the integrity of its seal until it was delivered to you, you will be able to share it with the boy. For he of a faithful spirit keeps the instruction, and as retribution he must know the secret. You know me, and you know that for me the end will never justify the means. Meet my son Kadmiel, accept him as you would me in person. With great affection, your friend Asael.
And it happened that when he finished reading the letter, tears came to Kadmiel's face. The old man was smiling and did not notice that the young man had finished reading the letter and was now sobbing. Suddenly, the old man Eleazar put his hand on the boy's shoulder and said,
My son, from this moment on, you must give up any thought that would persuade you that I will spoil you so that you will reach your goals easily. Though you have the recommendation of my great friend and mentor, Asael, I will treat you as I would expect to be treated if I were in your place. So to begin, I will ask you, how many copper coins have you managed to hoard during this time?
I have 1,000 copper coins. For Asael gave me 1,000 copper coins as my salary for all these years. And by trading my steed with the camel drivers, I got a camel plus 30 copper coins. However, for my clothing and living quarters, I had to have 30 copper coins.
Well, good. And as for the trade you have chosen to pursue your vocation, it is that of a sower, right?
Yes, sir.
Fifth flash of wisdom. Then the old man looked him straight in the eye and said,
As you know, every vocation has a very high price, and it is the price that determines its value before God and man.
That's right,
replied the boy.
Very well, very well. Then my first condition for helping you is that you pay me with your 1,000 copper coins and your camel. In return, I will help you find a place for you to ply your trade, and I will give you lodging for as long as you have to live in Sagnit.
Kadmiel shook his head.
I don't understand, sir. Will I be left with nothing of what I earned in my country?
Eleazar disagreed with a slight shake of his head and said,
Don't look at it like that, boy. Do you really want me to become your master?
Yes, sir, I hope so.
Then let me teach you a very valuable lesson. The man who pays a fair price in advance of his dreams will always go to the end regardless of the obstacles. For the price paid in advance is a token of his faith. He who dreams with this faith has to live his dream at least twice. This price you pay today will only be a sign or amount that you give as a guarantee to yourself, to God, and to your mentor that you will go to the end of the road. If you do, you will certainly not give up.
Kadmiel frowned temporarily, then said,
Now I understand why I have to pay a price. However, I still don't understand why, in addition to paying with money, I have to pay with my camel.
The old man looked at him with pleasure and replied,
The price you will pay will be like the anchor which you yourself will cast from your boat to the bottom of the sea, to secure your ship and prevent her from drifting away because of the current and the waves that strike her. Remember that the anchor has 3 points, and these enable it to cling to the seabed, preventing the ship from drifting away. Likewise, every great purpose will take time, training, and many failures to achieve. Now, your money is only a representation of how well you spent your time, performed during your training, and overcame failures. Money is only the result of your good stewardship, which is shown by your shrewd performance in these 3 aspects. Finally, your camel symbolizes your vessel, and as the sailor is attached to his ship, you have become attached to it. You must surrender all that binds you to the past and move on. Only then will you be able to fulfill your purpose in life. Leave what is left behind, for you must give yourself boldly to your chosen trade, putting your hand to the plow and not looking back. The ship will only serve the sailor when he is at sea and faces the strong waves. However, if he chooses another trade, he must hand it over and leave it in the harbor. In the same way, you must give up your camel, for you will no longer be a dweller in the desert, but will begin to plow the field.
The young man nodded, and with a sigh said to the old man,
Then I suppose my possessions will be the first seed I will sow in this new field.
Eleazar paused and then continued,
Indeed, plant this seed as the earnest of your desire. Nurture and water this seed with the immense sacrifice of unwavering faith, and the Most High will provide the means for your vocation to continue to grow to perfection. Only in this way will your vocation fully serve the world. Always take each sacrifice as a new foundation to be planted in order to build an unshakable foundation that will support the edifice of your dreams, your great vocation. Your vocation and your purpose, like the tree, are born from a seed. This first sacrifice you make will be the seed that will grow the tree of your purpose and vocation in life. Do not worry, my son. You are already a man who has found his vocation. Therefore, your ship already has the helm, and regardless of the winds and the fury of the sea, you will reach dry land.
When he had finished all these words, Eleazar said to Kadmiel,
Then let us begin. Give me your copper coins and inform my servants where you left your camel.
Kadmiel then gave Eleazar his money and informed his servants of the location of his camel. And having delivered them, he kept his most valuable possessions, including his grandfather's chest, Asahel's chest, and the shepherd's bag containing the leather tube with the papyrus inside.